This is only the first 3 units, so we got just a little bit more. Unit 1, 6 to 7 questions overall, at least probably 2 simple interest problems, one of which would probably be a simple interest exercise that uses a time factor that's not a complete year to find out if you convert that thing right. Or maybe a problem that gives you how much you borrowed and how much you paid back and asking you to find the interest rate. So the final exam prep quizzes will target these things. Each quiz pulls from all 4 of the units. So you won't see all of the simple interest on the first quiz, all the compound interest on the second quiz. You can see a little bit of everything on each quiz. So they literally are cumulative each time to kind of keep you guessing. 1 problem at least, maybe 2 problems on compound interest. If there's multiple problems, one of them would probably be a compounded periodically, quarterly, monthly, daily, something like that. And one may be a compounded continuously. So the formulas that you would expect to have had on test number 1 will also show up on the final exam. So you don't have to memorize the formulas. They're going to be there. It's just going to be your responsibility to pick the right version of the formula that's best for you. TVM solver problems, 3 to 4 of those exercises, somewhere in that vicinity. I would imagine that that would be appropriate. So you could be asked to find number of payments that have to be made. You could be asked to find what the present value is that you're borrowing if you're paying back a loan. You could be asked to if you're putting money in the bank, periodically you could be asked to figure out what the future amount is. At least one of the problems will be a 2-part problem, probably one of those housing problems where you paid back certain money over a period of times where they will ask you what the interest was that you put in there. So we want to look at some problems of that particular type. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Unit 2 dealt with ratios, proportions, counting, and probabilities. I would expect to see probably 5 to 6 questions that come out of there, maybe as much as 7 in the problem. At least one of the problems would be a Venn diagram problem, but it may not draw the Venn diagram for you. So let's call your memory into play here. Remember the questions that told you that you were having people on a tour bus and some spoke Spanish and some spoke French? They didn't draw a Venn diagram for that, did they? But yet it's a Venn diagram problem that you drew. Or maybe it was they play music and some play piano, some play guitar. Or some are freshmen, some are sophomores, some have cable television, some don't have cable television. Anytime they compare 2 quantities where they give you these alone or these together, something like that, turns into a Venn diagram problem. What will not be there is you will not see the 3-circle Venn diagram problem you saw in test number 2. That's too much. It's too easy to make a simple mistake on that one, and we're not interested in you making simple mistakes. We're interested in you showing a mastery of basic concepts. So we won't see a large, ugly 3-problem exercise out there. Some of the counting problems will probably be things that are related back to the identification codes, or the number of ways you could get cards dealt out of in a hand, a deck of cards, or a combination lot. So some of the questions you're going to see are going to target those things. Probably 3 or 4 problems that deal with the card problems, or with not just counting problems, but probability exercises. Somewhere in that vicinity. So the probability exercises still involve counting. You can see card problems there. You can see a dice problem, but they gave you the graphic for that. If we give you a card problem, we'll remind you of what the composition of the deck of cards is. So it'll tell you that there's 52 cards, 4 suits, what the suits are called, how many are in each suit, and that kind of breakdown. That may be an instructor tip, or it may actually be on the body of your test. Some of the problems you have there will involve the addition rule, where you have to be worried about not double counting a card. Some of the problems will be involving the multiplication rule, where you have multiple things you have to do before you finish with your activity. Counting and probability, our basic tool for that was we used a fill-in-the-blank type of approach. and we had to worry about whether order was important or order wasn't important. So those questions are targeted in the review type of things we have. Unit 3 dealt with statistics and normal distributions. What you will not see is that big 45-item question where you had to put in 45 pieces of data and then answer questions out of there. Any data set that you have to enter into the calculator will be smaller and more manageable. But yeah, you'll have questions that might ask you about mean and median and mode, standard deviation, range, etc. You will probably see on that long 45-item question where you had all the things with interquartile range and whatnot, you might see a question that would ask you, are there any data values in this set that are outliers? So if we're going to ask a question on outliers, they'll give you the interquartile formula ranges in the problem to be able to figure out what outliers are. It may look like an outlier, but we're looking to verify that. But the one question I know that will be there is the problem that gives you a 5-number summary and asks you to analyze that 5-number summary. So you might remember out of the test questions, they gave you one problem that talked about scores in a basketball game or over a season, and they asked you to find out what would be a typical score and approximately what % had scores bigger than this, and so on like that. You'll see a problem that will be somewhat like that. One of the other problems was the one that they gave you cigarette sales taxes or something like that. And it entered those type of problems. 5-number summary, you aren't going to have to draw a 5-number summary problem. You may have to create a 5-number summary, but the data set will not be that large. You'll definitely have to be able to analyze a 5-number summary type of problem. So we'll hopefully get a problem like that somewhere along the line in our review. Z-scores and applications. Any applications out of there are going to come out of normal distributions. The normal distribution might use the 68, 95, 99.7 rule, or you may see questions that say something like a data set was normally distributed with a mean of 120 and a standard deviation of 12. If you scored 132 on the test, how many standard deviations from the mean were you? Or they may ask you, what was your score if you were 1.5 standard deviations below the mean? So that number line relationship and approach to the problem would be a good way to be able to look at those exercises. I'm certain we'll see some of those, maybe not today, but definitely tomorrow. But you can expect to see some of those in the review quizzes you deal with. The last thing on Unit 4, probably a smaller number of questions on Unit 4 because it's the most recent thing that we've dealt with. No cryptography problem on Unit 4. Probably not a multiplication of matrices you have to do by hand. It wasn't there last fall, but that doesn't mean that it couldn't be there this spring. I don't remember it being there for the last year or so because it's not really the most important thing. But solving a system where they give you the words and you being able to set up the system using an augmented matrix, probably so. I'm absolutely certain that you will see at least one graphing problem. It may be just one inequality that you have to get the line and then which side to shade. It may be a system of inequalities where you've got 2 lines and you got to figure out the feasible region which line to shade. You will see one linear programming problem laid out exactly the same way that it was on the test, where we want to see the charts, we want to see the system with the constraints, we want to see the objective function, we want to see the graph, we want to see how you use the objective function to determine minimum maximum. So exactly like it was on the workbook pages, exactly like question number 10 off the test, I know there will be a problem like that. It will not be an ugly, so many phosphorus and nitrogen acid and that kind of stuff in there. It'll be something simpler like the number of cakes and cookies, or the number of adults and children, the price of their tickets that went somewhere. So it'll be something that we've seen before along those lines. Could be the problem similar to the one that was on the final where you were putting boxes of medicine and boxes of food onto a plane and trying to find out how you're going to get the maximum number of people served without overloading the plane, et cetera, like that. So one that we've seen before out of there. Probably only 3 or 4 questions that would come out of that set. But not an ugly problem, not an ugly set of problems, but not a huge difficulty level of problems in there. So this together, should be between all these things, we should probably be able to account for all 25 or some problems that would be there. I know it won't be fewer than 25 problems, and if you've got an hour and 45 minutes to be able to take the test, some of those 25 problems are going to be fluff problems. There will be questions you can answer because they're concept questions. They don't require you to do a whole lot of work. Or if there is work, it's basically calculator oriented or concept oriented. So